Here we are in Castlefield in Manchester. This is Timber Wharf. This was actually our first competition we did, our Urban Splash's first new build as well. And it was the first time we'd done new build. We wanted to create something very special, very different. So we held a competition, and actually we got Richard Rogers, one of the judges, and then discovered what was then quite an unknown architect called Glenn Howes. This site was really a very rundown part of Manchester. It was filled with very low-grade industrial uses. Most of those were empty. Buildings were literally falling down. There's nobody around here. And we had a vision really to turn what was one of the worst parts of Manchester into one of the best parts. What we're interested in doing is finding a diversity of different architectural styles and even methods of construction. And so we quite often use competitions to pick different architects. It's always very tempting just to go with the architects you already know or the ones that are very famous. But it's often more interesting to discover new architects, to discover new talent. For Timber Wharf, which was our first competition site, we decided we wanted to do a new building, but at that stage there was very little good architecture going up, certainly in Manchester. And we wanted to do a really great building that would stand the test of time. In the same way that we were restoring many old Victorian buildings, we hope in 100 or 200 years' time people want to preserve and restore the new buildings we did. So we had really a blank piece of paper. We had a blind competition in this case. We had, I think, hundreds of responses from all over the world of different people with different ideas of what they thought to do with the site. We ended up going with a young practitioner called Glenn Howes, who subsequently gone on to do lots of good and great things. But it was a great experience of competition. Urban Splash, we run all sorts of different competitions. Sometimes they're invited, where we just take 6 or so architects in on a short list. Sometimes they're blind, where when you're judging them, you don't know who the entries are. So it's always very difficult if you know you're comparing a Norman Foster to a young practice. People are often prejudiced against the smaller and they are prejudiced towards the big names. So sometimes we do it where the judges don't even know who the architects are, so everyone's got equal footing. What we're always trying to do is pick a winner and pick an architect's practice we get on with rather than picking the design. Because when you have the competition, people have only really put in full ideas, and we try to establish them as ideas competition. And it's a bit like, I suppose, interviewing an employee. But actually what you're after is you're after creative talent, you're after somebody who thinks like you're after culture fit. I mean, we've enjoyed working with our IBA competitions team, and we found them quite helpful. They do a number of things. First of all, I think they give the competition credibility. Architects, I believe, like to think that our IBA are involved because it means that the client won't just pick their favourite architect. There will be a proper process going through. They also help with the judges, and they usually pick 1 or 2 architects to chair the jury, and a high-profile architect typically are we involved. So again, give us some credibility. They also do a lot of the hard work. So a lot of the donkey work is taken out of it. They're very, very experienced at doing these things, and they can actually guide you along and help you in many different ways. Every time that you have a competition, you're surprised by the winner. You're also surprised by how many other good ideas come across for the scheme. And quite often we pick architects who may not win a competition, but quite often we'll use them later on for a totally different scheme, just because we've been impressed by their ideas. So the whole competition gives the architects exposure to clients and gives the clients exposure to architects, which probably is only a good thing both ways. In many European countries, a lot of young architects make their reputation by doing small schemes, typically houses, individual houses. In the UK, it's very, very hard for young practices to make their name, get a reputation. And competitions is a great way in for young architects. And I think increasingly we're seeing clients like Urban Splash who perhaps are a bit braver or able to take more risks, taking competitions, and end up with some quite young practices, which is fun. Most people have been very pleased with the end result of the competitions. In Timber Wharf here, it still gets a 10 out of 10 rating in most of the blogs about apartment blocks. It's got great architectural reviews in many of the architectural journals. I think there's a generosity about the space of it, which is quite unusual in most apartment blocks. There's a problem now that everybody ends up, because they're fixed by trying to get very small flats, they end up with monotonous apartment blocks and everyone looks the same and it gives nothing back. And the competitions route is a great way to come up with new ideas, to find new buildings and to find buildings that give something back to the general public and society. I think the IBA competitions approach is a great one. I think as a client, you've got to be up for it. Yeah, you know, one, you mustn't know who you want to use. If you already know who you want to use in architect, just go and work with them. You're wasting your money and time having a competition. 2, you must be prepared to invest some time, energy and effort into running the competition, because it does cost a few quid and it takes a bit of time to do it. And 3, I suppose that open-mindedness and the wanting to engage in a conversation with a number of different architects to do it. I think given that you're up for those sorts of conversations, then it's a great way of finding an architect and producing a scheme. The competitions process is fun, exciting, a way to bring in a load of stakeholders as judges, surprising, a way to meet new talent, and a way to get a load of different ideas for your site and a bit of publicity for the scheme as well. Urban Splash have always really enjoyed working with the RIBA and their competitions, and I believe we've had a whole series of really great schemes going back over the last 15 years where we've created some great architecture, and many of our schemes have been started at the RIBA Competitions Office.